All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? Thank you everyone for joining us this evening for the first Day in the Life event. The Day in the Life series is, I should say, the first Day in the Life event for spring 2021, not the first one ever. So some of you are already familiar with these, and for those of you who aren't, I'll give you a little bit of background. We started the Day in the Life series a few years ago, and it was originally designed for the graduate students. And that's why we look at developmental psychology and IO psychology in particular, because those are the tracks that we have in the master's degree program. But shortly thereafter, we started thinking that maybe this would be really great to open up to all of our students so that they could learn a little bit more, because undergraduates are just as interested in this information as graduate students. And so some of you are undergrads, some of you are grads, and you're all welcome, and we're glad to see you here. So the point of the Day in the Life series is really to introduce students to the paths that people come to IO and developmental psychology, but also where they go afterward, after the degree is over. And we're hoping that by presenting you with various psychologists in these two areas, that you get an idea of how broad and how open that degree is, and all of the many things that you can do with it. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Laura Civilek. She has been teaching in the psychology program for a very long time, and she also teaches in the HRL, the Human Relations Program at SPS. Dr. Civilek is also an academic community leader for the psychology program, which means that she sits as part of an advisory council on the psychology program, and she is also the head of the IO Talks for the Day in the Life series. So Dr. Civilek, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. Hi, everyone, and thanks to you all for coming. Thanks to Dr. Smith, too, for agreeing to speak to us all tonight. Dr. Smith and I met in graduate school. She is a fellow CUNY alum, so if you're hoping to stay in the CUNY world for a graduate degree, she's a great resource for that. She's been a colleague and mentor for a long time, maybe 10 years, Casey? I'm not sure, maybe that long. She's more on the O side of IO, and she's really done a little bit of everything in that world. Training, executive coaching, employee relations, lots of D&I work. So she's really on the cutting edge of a lot of what's happening in HR. She has strong knowledge of all the different functions, how they function or don't function together sometimes. So I'm really excited for her to talk to you and share some of her knowledge today. We'll have a Q&A at the end if you want to ask any questions. And with that, I will hand it off to you, Dr. Smith.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Laura. Nice to be here with you all. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and walk through the presentation of kind of my day in the life. Let me get it open here. I think one part of the day of the life is I'm on my work computer. So there are like 12 windows open of work that I probably should have gotten done today, but there's always tomorrow, hopefully. So to start, I thought I would begin just kind of with my educational journey, just as many of you all are embarking on or are seeing your way through. Wanted to begin and show a little bit of where and how I got to where I was getting. Let me see. Okay, there we go. So I started with my undergrad at St. Louis University. So I'm originally from the Midwest. Right now I am in Indianapolis, Indiana, but came here from Charlotte, from New York, where I was with Laura for a time. And then before then at Northern Illinois University. So I've kind of traveled a little bit across the country in a sense as far as education, but really began at St. Louis University. And there I had the opportunity to take an IO course, which I think was probably one of the new areas. I don't know. I think now more and more it's being more infused, and obviously you all are taking courses in that space. But before, it was exciting that that was a course available. And once I took that course, I was kind of dead set that that's what I wanted to do. Something that resonated with me was I had a professor that mentioned that we're at work more often than we are at home, and our work can really impact, how we continue throughout our day. It impacts your mobility, it impacts your availability, it impacts a lot of things within your life. And so seeing that targeted space and being very applicable to how I could practice psychology was an area that stood out to me. Additionally, my mom worked for a lab tech company, and she worked there for 20 years. She worked in the same area, so within St. Louis. She still lives there, so there was never anything like, oh, I'm gonna go travel or move somewhere else or do something else. It was her commitment to that organization. And then after 20 years, they did layoffs and she got laid off. And so I didn't realize it at the time, but I was seeing what it looked like when someone was impacted. Their career journey was impacted by an external force, and how was she going to define herself, after giving 20 years to an organization and then having to move elsewhere. So it's a lot of your self-concept that's also connected to your work self. And so I think all of that kind of played into why I really dived into IO psychology. So kind of being set on what I was doing, even though I think sometimes in hindsight, even today, I always question, I don't know what I'm doing, but I guess I kind of knew. So maybe there's this intuition that you kind of know what you're doing, even if you haven't declared it or actually said it out loud. Your spirit, I guess, kind of guides you in the way in which you're supposed to go. But so with that, I had applied to a PhD program at Northern Illinois University in social organizational psychology. And so I already kind of out of undergrad knew I wanted to take part in a PhD program. And I like to call this part out kind of in my journey because it's an interesting space where I'd actually left that PhD program and applied to a different one. So I completed my master's at Northern Illinois University and had a great advisor there. But I didn't see the fit. I didn't really fit in. It was a smaller town. I think the diversity has probably improved. I'm sure it has actually just across the Chicagoland area. But for me, I just didn't feel like I fit in the program. And I think that's something that I wasn't sure if I was making the right decision. I didn't know if it made sense to leave a PhD program. What would that look like? What are the implications of that? And I think we all sometimes come at a crossroads where we have to make those decisions that we think are the best for ourselves. And so at that time, I looked and I knew that I always wanted to live in New York. I knew that there was a great program at Baruch. And I just went for it and applied. And so I happened to get in, and that's where I finished my master's degree at Northern Illinois and then moved to New York to go to Baruch. And so there got a great exposure to different areas of study, the I side of industrial organizational psychology, the O side, really deep coursework. Our professors have some applied experience, so we're able to share some of their, applied perspectives. And during graduate school, I opted to take an internship. So I taught for the first year, but within the second year, just money and even I think you get a sense of how important when you see how much years of experience organizations are looking for. I kind of had that in the back of my mind, so I wanted to dive right into trying to get some applied experience. And I think there's always a balance with that. You have to balance your schoolwork and your ability to commit to the job that you sign up for. But as we see, many of us do it. Even as I referenced my mom during that time where she was laid off, she went back to school and got her bachelor's degree. So I think we all find that way, but it can be difficult. And I think it's just one to remember. But that's the path that I chose to take throughout graduate school. And so completed my studies at Baruch and finished my PhD. So just a little bit about my work journey. I started when I decided to do an internship. I started with Fenestra, which is now a company that was bought by BTS, so a big assessment firm. And it was started by two individuals that also went through our program. I say our because Laura, now you're just in my mind, but went through our program, and they do a great job of reaching back into the program and fostering talent and really giving people the opportunity and exposure to different projects. And so there I got a little bit of insight on the assessment side. So hiring, or when we use assessments for hiring. So if let's say you're hiring a bunch of financial advisors and you're trying to hire the one that is going to actually be successful in the job. You may have an assessment that helps you define, if a candidate hits this score or shows this competency, they're shown to be predictive to have better job performance. And so that's how we want to select our individuals. So I had an opportunity to engage in that work, understand what companies were looking for. Even there, I also had an opportunity to do some leadership assessments. So when you have a group of leaders in your organization and you want to know who's high potential or if I'm looking at my team, what are the competencies that my team has? So do we all communicate well? Do we all think strategically? Or are there some gaps where we want to work towards? So I know for my team to be successful, we need to be able to communicate effectively, and an assessment can show me if we are doing that or if we're not. So I had the exposure to really see how companies were using measurement to make decisions, to understand their teams better, different competencies. And then also, I think even on the side, which I didn't even realize, was I was seeing how a small business was being run. So I would see the founders of the business kind of negotiate with clients and understand what it meant to hold up your own brand and your own brand in consulting. And so that was a great opportunity as well. So leaving from Vernestra, I went to Aon Hewitt, which is a larger consulting firm, and had the opportunity there to engage in more leadership assessments. So thinking about if some of you have done this before, if you do like a personality assessment, right, you get the report back of how you're performing or what your Myers-Briggs acronym or what you are on those different assessments. And what I had the opportunity to do there is really create those 360 feedback assessments. So as leaders can take an assessment, or actually any employee can take an assessment, and they get feedback from the people that they work with, their peers, their direct reports, their leaders. So that all of that data is kind of combined into a report, and it gives you some insights on where your strengths are, where your development opportunities are, some action items you can take to improve. And so I really got to see how you structure feedback for a leader to receive it. And then additionally, I was also able to work on a project where I saw train the trainer. So we had assessments for leaders, and as you're assessing individuals, you kind of have to know what to listen for. So if you're putting someone through a mock situation, so if I were going through assessment and they wanted to assess me on my ability to analyze data, right? They may put me in front of in a situation where I have to understand what data I'm analyzing. I have to show how I'm doing it. I have to show my report out. And as I'm doing that, someone on the other end is assessing my performance. And so at Aon, I had the opportunity to kind of work with that person assessing the performance to check, are we being clear? Are our measurements delineating exactly what behaviors we're looking for? So really getting behind the science of how we measure performance, which can be iffy sometimes because we're talking about humans and we aren't all robots. So you have to be aware of the nuances. So from Aon, I moved to JetBlue Airways, and that was an interest to me because I wanted to move internal to an organization. So at that time, my previous experience for that past kind of 2 years was external, and I wanted to really understand what it meant to work internally to a company, to be able to follow a project kind of start to finish, to be along with those leaders while they're going through that change management. And so at JetBlue, I was on the talent management and diversity team. And there I got really kind of focused in, and I think that's significant to where my career path has continued to grow, is that space. I really enjoy talent management, such as performance management. So how do we set goals? How do we measure performance? How do we develop people? What about internal mobility? How do we have individuals move across the company as far as career development, leadership development? And then from a diversity perspective, I think I was kind of so fortunate to have the opportunity to think about how an organization defines diversity and that work. At the time when I started JetBlue, it wasn't a formalized strategy, and that's partly why I was added to the team to help support my manager and director to define D&I. So JetBlue, they always felt like they knew they did it, but how do we make it a strategy? How do we make it something that's useful and actionable, and we can commit to what our actions are to our clients, to our employees? And so it was really a great opportunity to see, how do you develop D&I? We talk about D&I, it should be present. We want more diversity. How do you make that real in an organization? And that was a great chance to do that there. So transitioning from JetBlue, I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. I also had worked at JetBlue a little bit in the airport, so got an understanding of really how we operated within the airport, how was our culture kind of coming down within the airport as well. But as I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, and had the chance to work at a company that was kind of headquartered in the Charlotte area, and that was at TIAA. And at TIAA, I mean, it stands out, and I think it's a testament to also who you work with. I had one of my best managers that's still a mentor to me today. So it's so interesting the people that you meet along the way in your career journey. But what she kind of helped me grow to do and see was, at first, when I started, I worked on the engagement survey, and so really had the chance to understand how our employees were experiencing the organization, what feedback were they giving us, how can we action on that feedback, how can we hold leaders accountable to those actions. And then also it fed into kind of a great place to work. And I don't know if many of you have seen that, but some organizations can be defined as a great place to work. And there's a process behind that. You have to do a culture assessment. Your people have to take a survey and really define where you are. And so it was a chance that I got to see, what are we saying as a great place to work, and how are we measuring up to other companies? So I led that work for the organization for part of my tenure. And then after that, I went to do performance management. So I led performance management for the organization. And as I mentioned before, that was goal setting, career development, performance reviews, performance assessments. We were also considering doing a no ratings process. So I don't know how far you all have gone with kind of performance management, but there's been a conversation about performance ratings. Do we use them? Do we not? And we were on a journey to understand if we should or shouldn't. So that was interesting insight, especially when you think about performance being tied to compensation. Really trying to define and understand, what does that mean if you try to piece those two apart. So I had a great experience there. I actually had ended my tenure at TIAA because I wanted to complete my dissertation. So it took some time to really close out that PhD. And I think that's a testament to what I mentioned of that work-life, school-life balance. And, sometimes you're giving and taking from different ways, but it all kind of balances out. And fortunately, I was able to join my current organization, Carrier, which is an HVAC organization, actually HVAC, refrigeration, fire security, but it's a manufacturing organization, which also kind of spreads my knowledge in an industry that I had not yet been in. So kind of moving in a summary version of just some areas of work that I've touched. And I think that was a mention that Carla and Laura has mentioned, is that there's so many spaces and there's so many avenues in which you can engage in this work. So I went from hiring and leadership assessments to competency modeling. So, what are we measuring leaders against? What are the behaviors that we want our organization to be known for? The way that we work with each other, the way that we approach our customers. If we're assessing leaders, what are we assessing them against? So really that competency modeling can feed into all of those components. Leadership development, so have done some kind of coaching from 360 feedback, from different ways to lead your team effectiveness, behavioral interviews. So from our interview process, there may be many times you go into an interview and someone's like, oh, tell me about, just give me a summary about your life. And that's one side of the spectrum. Or you could have someone that's asking you to tell me about a specific time you demonstrated these specific behaviors. And that's kind of more of that behavioral interview where you are being asked to kind of reflect a specific moment in something that you've done. So I had the opportunity to build those performance management, as I mentioned, diversity inclusion, culture and engagement, so the culture survey, and even succession planning. So now I really dive a lot into how are we defining our succession pools for these key roles in the organization. So, if leader A steps down, who is in line to come and take that place? And if that person is ready, how are we making sure that they stay ready? If they're not yet ready, what experiences are we giving them so that they become ready when that time comes? So that's all an interesting kind of piece, I guess, within the O side. And just within, I think, about 8 years or so, I've kind of touched many of these spaces. So I think that's what is the cool thing about IO for me, is that I have an ability to touch different areas if I want, or I can specialize and be kind of really solely focused on that particular, that streamlined type of work as well. So I wanted to add this slide here because I think for me, it represents a little bit of how HR is structured in organizations. And I thought it might be useful because it's something that I have experienced firsthand. And I think, previously when you heard about HR, it would be maybe the HR generalist or the HR BP role. And then you have your COEs. So then you started to see kind of the center of excellence piece. But I think and I don't know, I won't speak out of turn, but I think I'm kind of representative of my current role of this new type of HR kind of function and structure where you have an HR operations team. You have like your HR business partner that's partnering with the business. You have your total rewards, which is like your benefits and really those comp roles. And then you have talent management. So talent is kind of in its own area. It's become its own section of the COE. And an interesting role that I have now is I act as a talent partner. So I'm kind of like an HR business partner, but focused mostly on the talent needs of the organization. And so I think one conversation that has come up, and I don't know if it's come up for many of you interested to hear, but that HRBP, it's kind of like you're deciding between which areas you want to dive into. And the HR business partner is really strategic in working with the business leaders on the growth of their business. And then the talent kind of business partner, if that's a role you see within the organization that you go into or that you're currently in, is kind of focused. I think you'd see it populated with a lot of IO psychologists. So those that are really focused on that particular kind of streamline. And it's important for you to know the business, but you are there because you're a subject matter expert for talent. So I think that was just interesting. I mean, I hope it's interesting to you, but that was just something interesting to me because I think it's, as we're contemplating and gathering where we want to go and what we want to do, even today, I still am questioning like, okay, should I do an HRBP role to really understand what that means on the other side? Should I stay in the talent space? So I think it's just an interesting dynamic and maybe something you can look out for and see what elements of that area that you like based on your experiences within organizations. And so lastly, I just wanted to kind of close my kind of speaking part to an actual current day in the life. So what I currently do is I partner very closely with my HR leader. And so my current role is a talent partner. So I'm a senior manager talent partner, which means I sit between, I'm assigned to a particular business unit, but I support from kind of the overall corporate function to this unit. So I'm kind of the go-between, I'm the liaison. I'm expected to have the information that the organization is pushing out from a talent perspective, but also really being close and in tune with what the business itself needs to operate. So it's an interesting space. It's one that I really enjoy because I'm helping a lot of different people. I think I'm helping make connections if I'm doing it well. And so it's been one that I've kind of learned to navigate and really appreciate. So in that role, what I do is I partner with HR leaders and business leaders and the executive leadership team to discuss talent initiatives, needs for the business. I think one interesting thing that just happened was I led a discussion on recognition. So we had a engagement survey that came out, and recognition was a score that we were really low on, or not really low, but lower than the benchmark. And the leaders wanted to talk about how can we really improve recognition across the organization. And so that was a way in which I was taking data from, an overall survey that we do towards the organization, but really thinking about how we apply it within the business. I facilitate and lead talent discussions. So as I mentioned, for our succession planning, for our performance process, I've developed a mentor sponsor program. So we wanted to engage in kind of that career investment piece. So now I'm kind of spearheading a mentor sponsored program for the business in particular. And then with succession planning, our development reviews. So how are we defining who's high potential? Do we have the right definition? Are we making sure we're investing in these individuals and really being thoughtful about growing people within the organization? Deliver engagement survey results is what I often do, and then support action planning. So really helping leaders understand how they can use this information to improve their teams, to improve everybody's work environment, their work output. I mean, there's a lot of things that engagement kind of latches onto from a work outcome perspective. I work with HRBPs, managers, employees on leadership development, performance, training, even talent acquisition. And that's an area within my career that I haven't gotten as much exposure to, but now as I'm working very closely and embedded with the business, I'm seeing a lot more of the need and how talent acquisition really feeds into our hiring, how we go about hiring, what's our strategy for that. And then supporting the business and organization with global diversity and inclusion initiatives. And I think from last year, we saw a really big spike within organizations looking to enhance their D&I initiatives and then wanting to know how can we continue to improve. And so I've had the opportunity now to really dive in and help support the leaders and their actions to help support D&I. So with that, I think that kind of ends my, speaking alone. So I'll stop sharing and turn it back to Laura.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Smith. That was great. We actually already have a couple questions for you in the chat. Let me just make sure I'm getting to the first one. Okay, so we have from Ava. You gave an example of sitting behind the scenes, accessing someone while they analyze data. Was that a job simulation for an interview? And if it was, who decides what that looks like? Is it usually automated?
So it was defined by the consulting firm. So they have an opportunity to define, they measure, and really the importance of their assessments are that they're valid. So that was an example of someone coming in. So let's say, I'm trying to think of a random company name, but for some reason, every company. So let's say Pizza Hut is hiring for an analyst and they have a profile of who that is or what they found that makes a person successful at that role. So they can contract to Aon to host those assessments, right? So any hire that we get, we want them to go through this assessment, and you're going to help us understand if we're hiring the best people for this role, the ones that we have defined and that the measures show will be successful. Now, if you're doing role play, so let's say I'm going in for that role, and one of the portions of the assessment is a role play. So I have to come in, I have to pretend that you're a person, maybe a coworker giving me data. I have to simulate that I'm receiving that information from you. So what that is that's the part of that assessment. And then what you have someone on the other side of that, they're measuring that behavior. So I had an opportunity to do that a little bit, but I also had the chance to really help hone the measurement that we use to make sure that we're really accessing the right behaviors that actually predict performance. I hope that answers it.
Yeah, and Ava, please chime in and let us know if you have follow-ups on that. And I just want to point out too, Casey, I think brings something up, Dr. Smith, sorry.
No, you're good.
We're friends, so it's hard to be professional sometimes. When you work in HR, you inevitably will work with a lot of other vendors and consultant firms, large and small. I mean, there literally might be like 1 million HR related consulting firms out there. And especially I think when you're in roles like Dr. Smith, where you're really kind of touching everything within HR, inevitably you will have to, either work with or maybe even seek out vendors to help you who have specialized expertise in something that your company has decided they want to invest in. So the engagement survey, leadership development, training, I mean, really anything you can find a consultant to do for you. So that's like a huge part of working in HR, I would say, is kind of learning that space of vendors and kind of who is out there and what there is to offer, because any HR department and in an organization, even at some of the larger ones, they can't have every kind of expertise. And that's why it's so great. I mean, it means there's so many opportunities for jobs, both internally working in HR or at one of these, vendors or consulting firms. All right, so Kendra has a question about during your master's program, did you do internships during the summer or have any other experience prior to, I guess, she says your employment, I assume she means like full-time going into the workforce.
Yeah, so no, within my, so when I was at Northern Illinois, when I got my master's degree, that was kind of like my second year. So it was just teaching, and I didn't even really create a network at that time. So I think that's also an interesting piece, how a network can really help you get to where you're going. So at that point, I hadn't done anything except for teaching within the school. And then when I moved to New York, and I kind of I knew a little bit of what a PhD program meant because, inadvertently I'd done one or part of one. So that's where I felt a little bit more comfortable being able to go to work. So Fenestra and Aon were both kind of internship-like experiences for me. And then JetBlue was a little bit more engaged. I think at that time it was still a bit of an entry level. It might have been a hybrid, but that was actually like 9 to 5, 40 hours a week. So it was more of an actual embedded in the work and the role versus like the other ones where I kind of would come in maybe do 2 full days of work and then coursework on certain days. So the earlier ones were able to kind of adjust with coursework, but JetBlue, it was kind of full time.
Yeah, and I think, Dr. Smith and I have spoken about this because we were in the same program, but I think something we both were a little surprised by as we moved through our graduate program was how important your classmates are. Like they are actually going to be the ones who help you get jobs. Like somebody will get their foot in the door somewhere. And then when, they start doing well and move up and they find out their company's hiring, they let the program know and they put in a good word with the hiring manager. Hey, this person went to my program and, they're trained the same way as me. And so that's why when you're taking classes at CUNY and, engaging on the discussion boards are such a huge part of your classes, is because we want you to all engage with each other because you will be each other's network. Once you graduate, maybe a couple years past, once you all start working at different places. And so as online learning can be a bit isolating, but the more that you can put effort into making those connections with your classmates now, even though maybe they don't seem like they have the hookup, you never know in 5 years where people will be. And they could be, the foot in the door at your dream company. If anyone else has questions that they want to chime in verbally, feel free. You don't have to throw it in the chat. If you're brave enough to come off mute, I know it's a large meeting. One question, I know I struggled with this a lot myself. It's something I always recommend people to ask. But Casey, when you were when you decided to pursue a further degree, a graduate degree in IO, did you debate between a master's and a PhD? And if so, how did you kind of handle that decision or ultimately make that decision?
Yeah, I think for some reason I told myself I wanted to go for a PhD because I didn't want to have to apply twice, which I did anyway. So it's always like you can't really tell yourself what you never want to do because, sometimes you find yourself doing it anyway. But I think what it wasn't like a true kind of philosophical, like awakening of understanding. I think it was just like, oh, I think I want to be settled. So if I could just get into the PhD program, I know the master's is en route. So I just want to I want to do the big hit now, so I don't have to worry about, then going into a PhD program. So for me, that was kind of the major decision. But I would say now what I'm experiencing is I think you can get as far and further with a master's degree. I think the specialization of just IO psychology is helpful. It's useful. You learn a lot of your skill set within your master's courses, and with your PhD studies, you're obviously kind of learning research and data and having that mindset of kind of being research academic oriented. So there's definitely value to the PhD, but I would say now I don't know if I would have a deeper conversation, or would it just be a surface level as, oh, I just wanted to make sure I hit the big thing so I don't have to do it twice. But I think you can very much get very far with both, so it could be a different conversation now for me.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely in terms of career, you can have tons and tons of well-paying career options with a master's. I think the PhD is if you want that research component.
Mhm. And I think it speaks to what you mentioned before too, with like consulting firms. So I remember, I'm going through PhD courses and I'm like, okay, I really want to understand stats. Like I might be asked to kind of analyze data and really get into it. And so I want to make sure I'm still up to date. And you get into an organization, and these roles now kind of ask a lot of you, and you can contract that work out. Sometimes you're not even analyzing data anymore. Like your company has a contract with someone that's going to do that. Or now you see even systems, if you go to kind of a survey vendor, they have a dashboard, because the importance of data is for people to understand it and use it. So they want to now make a dashboard, so it's very easy to see. We don't need to see the statistics that go behind getting to those answers. So it's just an interesting piece, even with that, where you can find yourself really being comfortable in where you are and being able to source out to those areas that are areas of expertise to help you support and reach your goals within the organization.
Yeah, and analytics, even in particular, is its own skill set that is in demand even outside of HR now. So if you are go to a kind of a data heavy, most IO degrees are data heavy anyway, but some have more kind of stat nerd professors than others. But that's a whole other skill set that's really valuable to organizations, and it's just going to continue to get more valuable as time goes on.
Mhm.
All right, a couple more questions in the chat. I really enjoyed hearing Dr. Smith's career journey. It sounds ideal in terms of the opportunities you were able to access. Given the realities of life, can you speak about mentors/sponsors that you sought out in terms of understanding the space in which you sought to establish a career, and how were you able to create an effective network to help your career trajectory?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think I say it now that I'm an individual where I don't know if I know how to network, because, and maybe this is how you're supposed to do it, but if I get into a conversation with you, I'm probably going to go way deeper than I needed to about my own personal life. So if I, got into some kind of accident on the way there, like I'm just going to share everything, which I think you're supposed to use networking as more, you know, it's internal to who you are, but you're also supposed to be, setting up a standard for what you're looking for and things like that. So with that, I think a lot of my network just started naturally, and as Laura mentioned, with my cohort, with people within our program, I'll say that there's an individual in our program that has probably helped me find two, maybe 4 out of the 5 jobs I've had. Like for some reason, he always knows, and he always is a great person to set it up or to at least steer me in that direction. So I always joke that I probably owe him money at this point, but so it was really kind of just organic. It was just individuals that I knew, and I knew that they were doing something. And as I've gotten more further and older in my career, I've had the opportunity to have great managers and they have subbed as those mentors, but I never was a part of like a formal mentorship program. Actually, I am now, but it's the first time within my organization. The Society of Industrial Organizational Psychology, they had started a mentorship program for minority students. And I think about maybe 3 years ago, I engaged in that program. So as I started to get a little bit more comfortable, I sought it out a little bit more, but it really went at my own timing. And it was really at the beginning, who was I naturally already talking to and who was I engaging with? Um, I would say that I was a bit shy in that arena, and I still probably am, but I'm learning more how to engage and connect on LinkedIn, even though I don't post on my own, so that's probably something I should do. But still seeing the landscape, reading where people are, kind of just making mental notes of who's doing what, and then also I try now to kind of help people the way people have helped me, even if it wasn't in a formal kind of mentoring relationship. So I would say organically is the way that I went about it first. And now I'm trying to learn how to be a little bit more deliberate.
Okay. This next one, I'm not sure if this is referring, Carla or Heather, maybe you could jump in. For LinkedIn, is the IO Alum Network specific to CUNY SPS? I'm not sure what IO Alum Network they're referring to.
Yeah, this is Dr. Marquez Lewis. So as the director of the program, we've set up 2 LinkedIn networks for alums. So one is the IO side, and then one is the developmental side. So these haven't been going on very long, but they now have a lot of students. So they've been very popular, and it was actually students who came to us and asked us if we could start this. And a faculty member, Clemente Diaz from Baruch, said that he would oversee it. So he now oversees the LinkedIn network, and so once students graduate, they usually join. You're welcome to join now. And it's just a way for you to stay in touch with one another at SPS. Yes, only SPS.
Okay, so it's only SPS. Okay, great. Thank you. Good question. Another question from Kendra. So you either apply for the master's or the PhD?
Yes, so you can choose. There are master's programs across, the world. There are PhD programs as well. So if you know, like, oh, I know that I want to at least get my master's degree, you can apply just to a master's degree. If you know you want to get your PhD, en route to your PhD, you will complete a thesis to complete your master's. So you'll have your master's while you're continuing your studies and your research into getting your PhD as well.
Yeah, and that's something probably to look into. I know for me, I did because I had waffled so much between the master's and the PhD. I kind of wanted that backup that if I didn't finish the doctorate, that I could still leave with my master's. And some programs don't let you, so you should definitely check if you're going the PhD route. Okay, another question about work from Shane. When you developed the DI program at JetBlue, was it challenging to find exciting research or a model at the time? Great question.
It actually was a lot of companies to benchmark. I think there have been companies that have really been profound in this space. They created ERGs before ERGs. At the moment where I was, and I can remember because the conversation was JetBlue had already had a few ERGs, and what we wanted to do was transition them to BRG, so business resource groups. And what that means is transition them in a way and such they're more impactful to the business so that they're actually influencing decisions. They're embedded in different processes throughout the organization. And there were quite a few companies that had done that. I think if I remember, it might have been Prudential, Coca-Cola, a few of the finance organizations had done it. So there was surprisingly quite a bit of research. And I think what you see is now where there's been more of a conversation about D&I just from a national landscape, you could see the difference between companies that were already investing in that space and companies that had not. So companies that had not were kind of scrambling a bit, trying to figure out, what are we going to do? Let's put out a statement. Let's see if we can pull together a few actions, do a bit of a press release, talk to our employees because we haven't talked to them before, where you had other companies that were kind of, pioneers in the area. They already had a chief D&I officer. They already had a D&I council. They already had D&I goals in their corporate scorecards. They already had leaders measured to that success. So if you weren't meeting your D&I goals, it impacted your bonus target. So I think there's a variation, and I think more and more now with the landscape, we'll see companies continue to move towards what that means and how they stand that piece up within their organization. But there was quite a bit at that time too.
All right. Another question sorry, I just want to make sure I don't miss one. Is there, from Elizabeth, is there overlap with HR jobs versus IO careers, and where are the similarities? And then related to that, in terms of salary range, is there a big disparity for having a master's degree versus a doctorate?
So as far as the overlap with HR and IO, it's a huge overlap, I think. And that's where, as I was kind of walking through that one slide, it's not getting blurry, but it is getting interesting, because there are times where myself, I say, I've gone through this IO Psych program. I'm specialized in talent specifically, but do I need to be an HR business partner? Like, do I need to see what that side? And usually kind of the HR business partner is in line from a BA in psychology or HR generalist, and you kind of continue to work your way up in the organization. I think that's usually the track within an HR VP. But more and more, I'm seeing more of a crossover. I'm seeing a lot of colleagues of mine wanting to get that experience, because it's a revered role in the organization, and you get a connection to business leaders where sometimes you may not, from the talent perspective. If you're sitting within the center of excellence, you support the organization overall. You're never attached to like one leader. So I've seen definitely a blur. And as far as salary, I think you can, if you are part of PsyOp, you can get salary information. I think they do a workforce report. I would say that there's probably a difference. However, I don't think that there's a big gap, because a lot of organizations ask for years of experience, and years of experience usually end up getting you, those different roles. And so I would say that I don't think if I had my master's degree, I would be worried at all about, what type of salary I could, as long as I kind of negotiated for it and, knew the market data. But to me, it's probably small, if any. It's really, they lean on kind of that experience you have.
Yeah, I think the most I've seen is that maybe if you have a doctorate, you'll start maybe at like a senior level role as opposed to straight entry level. But even that's not a guarantee. Like Dr. Smith said, it's companies really want job experience. The degree is just kind of a checkbox thing, that you have a degree in the right area, but they want you to have experience, not 5 years of classes necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I had to turn the light on. I didn't realize.
Oh, no worries. I'm just checking the chat box again. A question from Heather. How have you successfully navigated around folks who don't give weight to benchmark and engagement results?
What I usually try to do is make it so just the organization, or I guess, well, I'll go with my line of thought with the question as far as the importance of results in itself. So even if you're absent of a benchmark, which you may just be comparing to yourself, right? You give the survey out one year, you give it out next year. So your comparison is only to yourself and not to other companies. My guidance usually when I'm working with leaders is for them to understand that the results that you have are true results. So employees didn't make it up. The numbers that you received, the data you received, that's the data. So we can ignore it, which is not, helpful to anybody, or we can engage in that data and understand what it means and understand what's the source of it. And so what I try to share with them is that ultimately, any actions that you're doing to improve and to meet employees where they are, it's going to be valuable and it's going to have an actual impact on how you work as a team. So making it like a bottom line for them, a feature that's important, is where I really try to help leaders understand the data. Because even if there's no, and I shouldn't say this as an IO psych, but even if there's no true validity to the measurement, right? So let's say, it didn't come from a big, research firm, or it didn't come from an engagement survey firm. If you sent out a survey monkey and asked people, do you hate it here? If a lot of people said yes, that's valid. I mean, that's enough that you need to go figure out why they're saying that, because they're giving you their true perspective. So I try to just approach it in that way, that the voice is the voice. And if you want to continue to empower employees to share it, you have to show that you're doing something with it.
I agree with everything you just said. Elizabeth, did you want us to unmute you so you could ask your question? No, Elizabeth had a follow-up question.
Okay.
Maybe not.
I did see one question. I did get one about, as a woman of color in an industry where there probably isn't much representation, has there been any particular aspect of this career?
Is super helpful to know.
Is she unmuted?
Oh, sorry. Elizabeth, are you talking? I think it's a little bit quiet. Elizabeth, are you there? Can you hear? We unmuted you if you want to go ahead and ask your question. No. Oh, Elizabeth, did you want to go ahead?
You may have froze. Or it might be me freezing.
Yeah.
That happens to me all the time.
Yeah, I don't hear anything.
Well, I did get one question.
Why don't you go back to, because yeah, that's a great question too.
It was, as a woman of color in an industry where there probably isn't much representation, has there been any particular aspects of this career that has been impactful to you that you feel that you made the right choice? I think that's a great question. And for me, I think that I appreciate being able to help others. I think I hope inherently in this role that you're able to act in service of others. You're able to be a voice for employees in a space where they may not be heard with the engagement survey. You're able to be an eye to understand, are we accurately representing the organization as we should from like a succession planning perspective? So do we have diverse slates? Are we allowing everybody the same opportunity to get to a particular level within the organization? It allows you the ability to say, oh, our hiring practices, it's a bit interesting. I think we're seeing that we're bringing in the same people. So is there something that we can continue to work on and fix to help engage in that? So you get a keen eye to be able to notice some of the cracks where, we're probably doing the right thing, but something's slipping. And there's areas where, a lot of people aren't being able to lead to that next step. And I think for me, that's probably one of the most positive things is it's like I'm like a little spy in a sense where I can see those areas in which may not be open to kind of the eye that's just going in a business, you're just moving, you're executing, and sometimes the details can get away. So I like that this role allows me to be that eye to see, hey, there's an opportunity here that we can capitalize on, and it would be impactful and beneficial for everyone and give everyone a fair and equitable chance if we do this right. So that would be my answer there.
Okay. And Elizabeth chimed in back in the chat.
Okay.
With a master's in IO Psych, what is the ideal HR role to start with? Where can one learn an HR generalist function? Or sorry, where one can learn an HR generalist function.
Yeah, I think with the master's, you can honestly, you can start anywhere. I think mostly the progression is often an analyst role, so our specialist role. So it'll be like a talent management specialist or a talent management consultant. With the HRBPs, I think you could even get an HRBP role. And then you'll see like senior HRBP, associate director HRBP, kind of how the titles grow and move as you move up in the organization. But I would say an HRBP role is a great entry level area. I think with a master's degree, that's definitely a great fit. And then within like a specialist, senior specialist role as well. And I am learning myself is to also remember and be an advocate for what you know. You know, if you're looking at that role and you see that job description and it's a senior consultant role, but you know it, then, and you maybe you know 80% of it. Yeah, as we've seen some of the research say that, you know, women often kind of shy away from roles that they don't meet 100%. If you know 80% of it, you know, apply and get into that interview process and see what are some of the questions, and you even there can ascertain maybe what are some gaps and what did you know. But I think if you see a role that you think fits you, that you enjoy, you know, as long as you're not the CEO of the company or you know maybe CHRO, I would give it a second glance and see if I wanted to take the time to do it and apply for it.
All right. Any other questions before we start to wrap up? Is your last chance to ask Dr. Smith anything about working in the HR space? All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Oh, whoops. Speaking of another comment, kind of, I guess, from Kendra. Speaking of gaps, I'm nervous about the analytical component.
I think that's a fair area to be nervous. And I think sometimes I know that I can get nervous as well as thinking about what's my aptitude in that space, how good am I in that? And one thing that I've had to learn is, and I think we're surrounded by people that we know. And if you're in school and you're connected with people, you know you're naturally comparing yourself. You know, like, oh, so and so really knows stats a lot better than I do. But I think one important thing is if you are taking the courses, you're probably taking them when other people have not. So you're learning something that other people may have not learned. So you're comparing yourself to the wrong benchmark. You should be comparing yourself to, you know, what is it the knowledge that I have, and not necessarily in the academic mind frame of, okay, can I get an A? You know it, and you can, if you know it sufficiently, you can bring that information into the organization. And then I think another part of analytics where maybe, you know, if you hadn't taken stats courses, you know, maybe you don't have the analytics side, but you know how to read data, you know how to interpret data. And you can use that as a skill set as well, because often, as we mentioned before, some organizations have consulting firms or different vendors that they use. And your job is then, how do you use the data and share it? How do you take the data that, you know, someone else has analyzed, but make it useful to a manager or to a leader or someone else that's supposed to action on it? So that's a skill set you can say, you know, I know how to interpret a report and give it to someone and help them understand where the key points are. And though you may not know the analyst or how to analyze it, you do know how to deliver it. And so I would lean on that skill set as well.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Smith. I think we have, one more thing. We just want to remind you guys of the next Day in the Life series talk. It's going to be switching back to a day in the life of a developmental psychologist. We'll be hearing from Dr. Juliana Karas-Jean Gillis. And that's going to be April 8th, 2021. 2020 is over and never to return, thankfully. So it's going to be April 8th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. So the same time as this one. We hope that you will join us for that as well. And yeah, I think, did Dr. Marquez Lewis or Heather have anything to wrap up? I'm sorry. I
No,
forgot
not for
that
me.
one. Great. All right. Well, thanks again, everyone. We really appreciate you being here tonight. And thanks again to Dr. Smith for sharing her experiences with us. Have a great rest of your night, everybody.
Thank you.